This week we begin the story of a man who shaped the very bones of Western history. A man born into nobility, yet surrounded by danger. A man whose ambitions stretched across rivers, mountains and empires. A man whose name, Caesar, would echo through centuries, carried not only by emperors but by legends. Tonight we trace the quiet beginnings of that story, from the warm atriums of Rome to the shadowed alleys of political exile, from youthful defiance to the first steps toward destiny. This is not a tale of marble statues or distant myth. This is the life of Julius Caesar, told not in haste, but in reflection. Let us begin. In the year 100 BCE, in the simmering heat of a Roman summer, a boy was born to the Julian clan, a family noble in name, but modest in standing. They called him Gaius Julius Caesar. He came into a republic torn by ambition and civil discord, where men rose not by birth alone, but by daring and blood and charm. His family claimed descent from Aeneas, the Trojan prince, and through him, from Venus, goddess of love and beauty. But in the real, unyielding world of Roman politics, divine ancestry was a fine story, and little more. Caesar's early years unfolded under the shadow of revolution. His uncle by marriage, Gaius Marius, was the dominant figure in Rome, a general, a statesman, and a hero of the common people. Marius had opened the army to the landless poor, upending centuries of tradition. But this bold populism made him bitter enemies among the conservative Senate, the Optimates. They feared what he represented. They feared change. Lucius Cornelius Sulla rose up in opposition. Cold, calculating and ruthlessly traditional, Sulla marched on Rome itself. It was a violation of everything sacred in the Republic. No general before had dared to bring his legions across the sacred boundary, but Sulla did, and Marius fled. Caesar, still just a teenager, watched as the city descended into bloodshed. His father died when Caesar was 16. It was a quiet death, sudden, natural, but its consequences were profound. Gaius, barely a man, now stood as head of his household, and it was then that he made a choice that revealed something of his soul. He refused Sulla's command to divorce Cornelia, his young wife, daughter of Marius's former ally. It was a dangerous act of loyalty in a time when defiance could cost more than honour. Sulla stripped Caesar of his priesthood, his inheritance, his position in society, and when that wasn't enough, he marked him for death. Caesar went into hiding. He moved between safe houses, dodging the spies and assassins of the dictatorship. Those who helped him later recalled his calm, his stillness, but there must have been fear too. And perhaps late at night he asked himself, as every young man does, what kind of life he meant to live. Eventually, friends interceded on his behalf. Sulla relented, but he is said to have warned them, eyes narrow, "In that young man there are many Mariuses." He was right. Caesar would not forget the fear. He would not forget the choice, and he would never again leave his fate in the hands of another man. Exiled from Rome's political stage, Caesar joined the legions. In Asia Minor, he served with distinction, learning the rhythms of war. In battle, he proved himself brave, reckless even. He earned the civic crown for saving a fellow soldier's life. This was no theatrical award. He had stood amid flying javelins and dying men, and held his ground. He also watched how commanders moved, how loyalty was won, how land and gold were divided after a victory. The Republic, he began to understand, was more theatre than constitution. Laws mattered, but not as much as legions. By the time he returned to Rome, Sulla was dead. The Senate was uneasy, the people restless. Caesar was no longer a boy, but not yet a man of power. He made his mark where he could, in the courts, with his voice. He took on risky cases defending victims of corruption and provincial abuse. His speeches were vivid, passionate, even beautiful. Cicero, the great orator, called them too artistic, a compliment veiled in jealousy. But Caesar didn't just speak to win, he spoke to be heard. His style was emotional, stirring, crafted not for applause, but for memory. In a city that forgot most things, people remembered Caesar's voice. Then came the pirates. He was sailing to Rhodes, hoping to study under the greatest orator of the day, when his ship was taken off the coast of Asia Minor. The pirates demanded 20 talents of silver. Caesar laughed. "You don't know who I am," he told them, amused. "I'm worth at least 50. They accepted the higher ransom, curious. Over the next 38 days, Caesar lived among them, not as a frightened captive, but as a bemused superior. He recited poems to them. He joined in their meals. When they failed to praise his verses, he jokingly called them illiterate barbarians. "When I'm free," he warned, "I'll crucify every one of you." They thought it was a jest. When the ransom was paid, Caesar left. He raised a small fleet, pursued the pirates, captured them, and kept his promise. But in a gesture that reveals the complexity of the man, he ordered their throats slit before crucifixion, mercy within cruelty, justice served with a careful measure of humanity, or perhaps just a calculated appearance of it. In the years that followed, Caesar climbed steadily. He served as questor in Hispania, where he first saw what Roman expansion could mean. Gold mines, markets, tax collectors, and governors ruling like kings. At Gades he visited a statue of Alexander the Great. Staring up at the cold marble face, Caesar was silent for a long time. Then he turned away, and someone close to him heard him murmur, "Alexander had conquered the world by my age, and I have done nothing." He returned to Rome with that fire burning. As idle he spent wildly, money he didn't have, borrowed from creditors who saw in him a rising sun. He hosted gladiator games so lavish they made his name echo through the streets. Children knew him, veterans cheered him, senators scowled. He became Pontifex Maximus in 63 BCE. It was a stunning victory. He was too young, too radical, too much a threat. But he won narrowly, through charm, alliances, and immense bribes. "If I lose," he reportedly said before the vote, "I will go into exile." He did not lose. He moved into the Domus Publica, beside the sacred hearth of Rome. From there, he could see the Forum each morning. He wore the robes of Rome's highest priest, but he was not thinking of temples. He was thinking of power. He loved his daughter Julia, the only child of Cornelia. She was, by all accounts, gentle, bright, and deeply loved by her father. When Cornelia died, Caesar married again, to Pompeia. The union was political, as most were. But when scandal struck her name, involving a man who had snuck into the women-only rites of Bona Dea, disguised as a woman, Caesar divorced her without proof of guilt. Caesar's wife, he said, must be above suspicion. His image mattered more than sentiment. Still, there was warmth in him. He was capable of real feeling. But he had long since learned that Rome did not reward sentiment unless it served spectacle. By 60 BCE, Caesar had reached the edge of the highest office in the Republic, but the Senate was blocking him, wary of his rising power and radical appeal. So Caesar made a move that would alter Roman history. He reached out to two men, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, Rome's most successful general, beloved by the army and feared by the Senate, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, whose wealth was so vast it distorted the economy. the three men met in secret. They shared nothing but ambition. Caesar offered popularity, Pompey offered veterans, Crassus offered money. They agreed to work as one, and just like that, the first triumvirate was born, not in marble, not in law, but in whispers and handshakes. In 59 BCE, Caesar was elected consul. He passed laws favouring Pompey's soldiers, distributing land to the poor. He married his daughter Julia to Pompey, sealing the alliance with family. He fought the Senate, mocked the traditions they hid behind, and won the people. When his consulship ended, Caesar arranged for a 5-year command in Gaul, modern-day France, and beyond. It was a wild, brutal land, rich in opportunity, home to dozens of tribes and tens of thousands of warriors. There he would have an army, and with it, freedom. He left Rome with debts behind him, enemies sharpening their knives, and the future stretched wide before him. He would not return the same man. When Julius Caesar left Rome in 58 BCE to begin his proconsular command in Gaul, he did so with a sense of purpose that pulsed beneath his calm exterior. He had not forgotten the statue of Alexander, nor the many years he had spent building influence, step by deliberate step. He had won the consulship, yes, but in the eyes of the Republic, one term in office did not yet make a man great. It was not enough to pass laws, not enough to please the crowd. Rome respected victories. Rome remembered conquerors. And beyond the Alps, opportunity waited. The Gallic provinces he was assigned to govern, Cisalpine Gaul to the north of Italy, and Transalpine Gaul across the mountains, were not yet fully subdued. The tribes there were independent, proud and fragmented. To many in the Senate it was a quiet command post, a place to keep Caesar busy and out of Rome's affairs. But Caesar saw it differently. He saw terrain to be conquered, peoples to be pacified, and legions to be forged in fire. The Helvetii were the first to march, a massive migration of tribal peoples from what is now Switzerland. They sought to resettle further west. It was a threat not only to Roman security, but to Roman dignity. Caesar met them head-on, intercepting them at the Saone River. His victory at the Battle of Bibracte was decisive, but not just militarily. He chronicled the encounter in precise, clear Latin, setting the tone for his entire Gallic campaign. He would fight, yes, but he would also write. He would shape the narrative. Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres, he began. All Gaul is divided into 3 parts. These words, the first line of his Commentari de Bello Gallico, were more than just history. They were a claim to legacy. Caesar wasn't just winning battles, he was making sure everyone knew about them. He fought with his men, ate with them, marched with them. He knew their names. In the cold forests of Gaul, soaked in mud and smoke, he became more than a general. He became a figure of myth. They called him Imperator. They trusted him with their lives. There were many tribes in Gaul, some hostile, others cautious. Caesar knew when to fight and when to flatter, when to punish and when to promise protection. He understood that war was not only won with swords, but with silence and suspicion. Divide your enemies. Offer one tribe Roman friendship, while you burn another's village to the ground. Over the next several years he campaigned relentlessly. His legions moved like a machine, building bridges across rivers, digging ditches around enemy camps, constructing siege works that amazed even his rivals. He crossed the Rhine in a show of force, not because he needed to, but because he could. Let them know, he said, that Rome is not bound by rivers. It was engineering and intimidation in one stroke. He stayed only briefly, then withdrew. leaving behind a trembling silence. The Germans had seen what Caesar could do, and then to Britain, no Roman general had ever crossed the sea and returned. It was a land of legend, of mist and druids, and painted warriors. Caesar launched his expedition not because it was necessary, but because it was unthinkable. Twice he sailed across the Channel, fighting fierce resistance, facing storms and supply issues. He won only modest victories, but the symbolic weight was immense. He had gone farther than any Roman before him. He had stared into the unknown and come back alive. But Gaul was not finished, far from it. In 52 BCE, a charismatic chieftain named Vercingetorix united the Gallic tribes in rebellion. He was young, proud, and determined to free his people from Roman rule. For the first time, Caesar was facing not scattered resistance, but a national uprising. The campaign that followed was brutal. Villages were burned, by the Gauls themselves, to deny Caesar supplies. His legions trudged through winter, starving, cold, ambushed by shadowy bands of warriors. It was perhaps the most trying period of his command. At Gergovia, Caesar tasted rare defeat. He underestimated the enemy, and his assault failed. Morale dipped. Senators back in Rome began to whisper, perhaps Caesar was not invincible after all. But Caesar had not come this far to retreat. He adapted. He tightened his grip, and he laid siege to Alesia, the hilltop fortress where Vercingetorix had taken refuge. What followed was one of the most astonishing feats of ancient warfare. Caesar surrounded the city with a massive ring of fortifications, ditches, walls, towers. Then, anticipating a relief army, he built a second ring facing outward. His men were trapped between two enemy forces, but they held the lines. For weeks they fought, bleeding from every side. Rations ran low, wounds festered, but they endured. And when the Gauls finally broke, it was over. Vercingetorix rode out from the gates of Alesia on horseback, silent and proud. He did not speak. He simply removed his armour, dismounted, and sat at Caesar's feet. The war was done. The rebellion crushed. Gaul belonged to Rome. Caesar had achieved what many thought impossible. In less than a decade, he had conquered an area larger than all of Italy, subdued hundreds of tribes, and forged a reputation greater than that of Pompey, his ally, his rival. Back in Rome, his enemies grew uneasy. They saw what Caesar had become, and they began to whisper of his ambition. He had gained too much glory, too many legions, too much loyalty from men who owed their fortunes and their lives to him. In 54 BCE, tragedy struck. Julia, Caesar's daughter, and the beloved wife of Pompey, died in childbirth. Her child died too. With her died the last emotional bond between the two men. The alliance, always practical, now lost its warmth. Caesar had loved Julia deeply. Her death was not just a political inconvenience, it wounded him. In the quiet of his tent, in the brief stillness between battles, he may have remembered her smile, the way she had softened Pompeii, the way she had once symbolised a future more stable than the one he now faced. 1 year later, Crassus marched east, seeking his own glory in Parthia. He was ambushed and killed at Carrhae, his army destroyed, his body desecrated. With Crassus gone, the triumvirate dissolved completely. What had once been 3 balancing forces now became 2, and they were no longer aligned. Caesar remained in Gaul, extending his command, winning more battles, pacifying restive regions. But Rome was shifting. Senators hostile to Caesar pressed Pompey to act. They portrayed Caesar as a threat to the Republic, a man drunk on power, unwilling to step down. When Caesar's term of command ended, the Senate ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome, not as a general, but as a private citizen. They offered him no guarantee of immunity. He would face trial for his actions during his consulship. He had broken laws, they said. He had bent the Republic too far. Caesar hesitated. He wrote letters. He offered compromises. Let both he and Pompey lay down arms, he said. Let the Republic decide between them without fear. But the Senate refused, and Pompey, now aligned with Caesar's enemies, called for action. Caesar was declared an enemy of the state unless he returned alone. On the banks of the Rubicon River, which marked the boundary between his province and Italy itself, Caesar paused. He had perhaps only a handful of men with him. Beyond the river lay civil war. But behind him lay dishonour, exile and silence. He looked at the dark water flowing gently under the moonlight. Alea iacta est, he said softly. The die is cast, and he crossed. The Rubicon was not a wide river. In the daylight, it might have looked like nothing more than a stream, modest, even forgettable. But in the shadow of Roman law, it was a boundary no general was allowed to cross with an army. When Caesar led his legions over its waters, he did more than break a rule. He broke the spell that held the Republic together. News travelled fast. In Rome, the Senate panicked. Consuls fled. Magistrates gathered scrolls and jewels and vanished before dawn. Pompey, once Caesar's friend and now his greatest rival, gave the order. Evacuate the city. He did not try to defend it. He knew what Caesar was capable of, and perhaps what his own men were not. Caesar entered the capital unopposed. There were no triumphal banners, no gold-strewn streets, just silence. The forum was nearly empty. The Curia, Rome's Senate house, stood shuttered. But Caesar didn't stop to revel. He moved quickly, efficiently. He addressed the remaining senators. He reassured the people. He declared he came not as a tyrant, but to restore order, to bring back liberty. But behind the calm words, there was urgency. Pompey had fled to the east, gathering ships, wealth, and the loyalty of the senatorial class. He still had the authority of the old republic behind him, and legions of his own. Caesar's campaign against Pompey was not quick. It was not clean. It spanned years, continents, and countless lives. First he turned south to confront forces loyal to the Senate in Spain. He moved with speed, defeating the legates Pompey had left behind. I am off to meet an army without a general, he said, and will return to meet a general without an army. By the time Caesar returned to Rome, the Senate declared Pompey sole consul. It was a desperate move, an open admission that they trusted no other man to oppose Caesar. In 48 BCE, Caesar crossed the Adriatic Sea into Greece. He was met by Pompey's full army. The Battle of Dyrrhachium saw Caesar on the back foot, forced to retreat, a rare moment of near defeat. But even in failure, his discipline held. Today the enemy would have won, he told his men, if they had a commander who knew how to win. Later that year, on the plains of Pharsalus, the two greatest generals of their age faced each other. Pompey had more men, more cavalry, the high ground, the Senate's backing. But Caesar had something deeper, loyalty, experience, an instinct sharpened by years of hard campaigning. His troops were veterans. They had marched through Gaul, crossed rivers, climbed mountains. They trusted him with their lives. As the battle began, Caesar held a reserve line, a hidden force placed behind his cavalry. When Pompey's horsemen charged, as expected, Caesar's reserve sprang forward, striking from the flank, sowing chaos. What followed was not just a victory, but a rout. Pompey fled the field. His men surrendered in waves. Some wept, falling to their knees before Caesar, expecting punishment, but he spared them. "I do not fight Romans to kill them," he said, "but to bring them back to me." Pompey sailed to Egypt. There he hoped to find shelter with the young king Ptolemy XIII. But politics in Alexandria was no gentler than in Rome. Pompey was lured ashore, then murdered, stabbed and beheaded before he even stepped fully onto land. When Caesar arrived days later, he was handed a sealed box containing Pompey's head. He turned away. His eyes stung. They had once been friends. He had married Caesar's daughter. They had shared tables, jokes, memories. Caesar had not wanted him to die, only to yield. He ordered Pompey's remains buried with honour, and for a moment he was quiet, but Egypt too was torn. The child King Ptolemy was locked in a struggle with his sister, Cleopatra. Caesar, ever attuned to opportunity and charisma, sided with her. The queen entered his chambers rolled in a carpet, or so the legend goes, revealed in silks and perfume, her voice confident, her eyes unafraid. Caesar was enchanted. For weeks Alexandria was a furnace of tension. Caesar's small force was besieged by the boy king's army. Ships burned in the harbour. Food dwindled. Caesar, cornered, refused to flee. He fought from the palace, from the rooftops, from the streets. When reinforcements arrived, the tide turned. Ptolemy drowned in the Nile, pulled under by the weight of his gilded armour. Cleopatra was restored to the throne. She ruled beside her younger brother, but it was clear who held the real power. Caesar remained in Egypt through the spring. He and Cleopatra grew close, so close that by the time he departed, she was carrying his child. The boy would be named Caesarion. But Rome was not at peace. In Asia Minor, the king of Pontus had declared war. Caesar marched to meet him. The battle was short, the victory total. His message to the Senate was curt, triumphant. Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. He returned west to confront the remnants of Pompey's supporters. At Thapsus, in North Africa, he fought a bloody battle against Metellus Scipio and Cato the Younger. Once again, Caesar emerged victorious. Cato, refusing to live under Caesar's rule, took his own life. "I am grateful to my enemy," he once said, "for giving me a noble death." Caesar did not rejoice. He had respected Cato in a way. The man was inflexible, severe, but honest. His death, like Pompey's, left Caesar standing more alone. At Munda in Spain, Caesar faced the final resistance, Pompey's sons and a coalition of Roman hardliners. The battle was fierce, close, nearly disastrous. Caesar fought on foot, rallying his men, risking his life like a common soldier. When victory finally came, he stood amid the dead, quiet. "This time," he said, "I fought not for glory, but for my life." He returned to Rome now as master of the Republic. There was no one left to oppose him. The Senate named him dictator for 10 years. Then for life, statues of him rose across the city. His image was minted on coins, something no living Roman had ever dared. He wore purple, the colour of kings. A golden chair awaited him in the Senate. Crowds hailed him as father of the nation. Priests whispered of divinity. But amid the applause, shadows stirred. He expanded the Senate, filling it with loyal men. He reformed the calendar, adjusting for years of neglect. He redistributed land, cancelled debts, launched building projects. He made laws that favoured the poor. And yet every action, however just, concentrated power. He dismissed his bodyguard. "No Roman," he said, "will lift a hand against me." But not all Romans agreed. He had everything now. The title of dictator for life, the adoration of the people, the Senate's applause, even if it was hollow. But Julius Caesar, the man, the flesh and blood Roman who had once dodged Sulla's assassins, who had fought among mud and pine in Gaul, who had whispered love to Cleopatra under Egyptian stars, he was still mortal, and the city he ruled had not changed. Rome was still a place where power flickered like a torch in the wind, bright but never safe. He worked constantly. His reforms were broad, detailed and sweeping. He drained marshes for farmland, began colonies for veterans, opened citizenship to more provincials. He filled Rome with marble and structure, bringing order to a city that had lived too long in glorious decay. He revised the calendar, our calendar. The year was off by months, thanks to mismanagement and superstition. Caesar, always a man who preferred precision to tradition, consulted astronomers and mathematicians. The Julian calendar was born. 12 months, a leap year every 4. A structure that would last not for years, but for centuries. But to the Senate, his every improvement was a reminder. It was he, not they, who ruled. Each new law was another brick in the monument of his control. Each coin that bore his profile felt like a whisper, a king in all but name. Rome had no throne, but Caesar was building one all the same. When Mark Antony placed a crown upon Caesar's head during the festival of Lupercalia, the crowd watched with sharp eyes. Twice, Caesar refused it. The second time, he pushed it away with a theatrical gesture, and the people cheered, but the gesture lingered. Refusing a crown still meant someone had thought to offer one. Behind the smiles, behind the praise, a quiet coldness was setting in among the elite. There were men in the Senate, honourable, ambitious, frightened, who felt Caesar had gone too far. They remembered the word tyrannus. They remembered the stories of the kings driven out of Rome centuries earlier. To them, Caesar was not a saviour, he was a warning come true. Brutus was among them, Marcus Junius Brutus, quiet, thoughtful, philosophical. He had once fought against Caesar, then been pardoned. Caesar trusted him. Some even whispered he loved him like a son. Cassius was different, sharper, restless, moved by pride and fear in equal measure. He hated what Caesar represented, not just a man with too much power, but a future where Rome's old values dissolved under one name. They gathered in quiet corners, in shaded gardens, in rented houses. Whispers passed like coals from hand to hand. They called themselves liberators, though what they sought was not peace but blood. Caesar, as ever, moved forward. He was planning a campaign against Parthia, the empire that had humiliated Crassus. He wanted to bring new conquests, new riches. He was preparing Rome for expansion beyond what anyone thought possible. He may have believed in his heart that his leadership was just and right, that it was the destiny Venus had seeded in his blood. But the warnings were coming faster now. A seer in the forum muttered to him, "Beware the Idas of March." Caesar smiled. He was not afraid of omens. His wife Calpurnia dreamed of his death. She begged him not to go to the Senate that day. Her tears were real. But Caesar, ever proud, ever unmoved by superstition, brushed her off. "What is to come," he said, "will come." He walked the streets that morning, surrounded by aides and friends. The sun rose over the forum. The Curia of Pompeii, the Senate hall used that day, waited for him in silence. Inside they gathered. The conspirators, senators with tunics beneath their togas, daggers hidden in the folds. He entered. The room closed behind him. One man approached, handing him a petition. Caesar waved him away. Another moved in closer. Another. then steel. The first strike missed its mark, grazing his shoulder. Then chaos. They came at him like wolves, men he knew, men he had dined with. He stumbled, tried to flee, but the marble floor was slick and the circle was too tight. Blades flashed. The senators pressed in. He saw Brutus. Their eyes met. "Et tu, Brute?" he is said to have whispered. "And you too?" They stabbed him 23 times. When it was over, Caesar lay dead at the foot of Pompey's statue, his rival in life, now his last witness in death. The Senate fled. The streets of Rome echoed with confusion. Some cheered, believing tyranny had died. Others wept, feeling the Republic itself had been stabbed. His body, half covered, still bled on the floor. A life that had begun under threat, that had danced with pirates, with legions, with crowns and comets, ended not in battle, but in betrayal. The man who had crossed rivers and seas now crossed the boundary of memory, becoming not just a general, not just a ruler, but a story told for 2,000 years. And so the life of Gaius Julius Caesar came to its end, not with peace, not with glory, but with silence and the sound of knives.